Priory of Sion, Holy Grail, and Knights Templar, the truth behind the Da Vinci Code. Hello and welcome back to Driftwood Histories. Tonight, our journey takes us into a story so powerful, so seductive, it has captivated the world for centuries. It is a story of a sacred bloodline, a hidden treasure, and a secret society sworn to protect the greatest secret in Christendom. It is a tale that weaves together crusading knights, Renaissance geniuses, and a mystery hidden in plain sight in the art and architecture of Europe. We are, of course, talking about the Holy Grail, but not the cup from the Last Supper. We are talking about a different kind of Grail royal bloodline, the Sang Real, that allegedly descends from Jesus Christ himself. And we are exploring the secret society said to have guarded this world-shattering truth for 1,000 years. The Priory of Sion. These names were catapulted into global consciousness by Dan Brown's phenomenal bestseller, The Da Vinci Code. But the story, the mythos, existed long before. It is a puzzle box of history, a labyrinth of clues, and, as we shall discover, perhaps the most elaborate and successful historical hoax of the 20th century. So, find your comfortable place. Let the modern world fade away. Close your eyes, and allow my voice to be your guide as we untangle the threads of this incredible tapestry. We will journey from the dusty hills of Jerusalem to a small, mysterious church in the French Pyrenees, and into the heart of a conspiracy that has blurred the line between history and fiction forever. Our story begins not in a library, but in a small, forgotten village with a poor priest who made a discovery that would change everything. Our story begins not in a grand library or a royal court, but in a small, forgotten village, perched precariously on a hilltop in the foothills of the French Pyrenees. In the year 1885, a young, ambitious, and deeply impoverished priest named François Béranger Saunière arrived to take up his new post in this village, Rennes-le-Château. This was not a prestigious appointment. Rennes-le-Château was a place lost to time, a community of a few hundred souls, its past far grander than its present. The Languedoc region itself was a land steeped in ancient and heretical history. This was the country of the Cathars, the medieval Christian sect whose dualist beliefs led the Catholic Church to launch the brutal Albigensian Crusade against them in the 13th century. It was a land of ancient Visigothic ruins, of local legends of hidden treasure, and of a profound, almost tangible sense of mystery that seemed to cling to the very stones. The church that Saunière was to lead, dedicated to Saint Mary Magdalene, was a reflection of the village's own decline. It was a ruin. It was dilapidated, its roof leaking, its foundations crumbling, a testament to centuries of neglect. The 33-year-old priest, with his meager salary, faced a monumental task. For the first few years, he lived in poverty, making small, necessary repairs where he could. But in 1891, with the help of a small loan and a donation from a local patroness, he began a more serious renovation of the church. It was during this work that he, or the workmen he hired, made a discovery that would become the seed of our entire story. While removing the old stone altar, which rested upon a hollow, ancient Visigothic pillar, they found something hidden inside. Sealed within wooden tubes were 4 parchments. 2 of these parchments were said to contain genealogies, one dating back to 1244, the other to 1644. But it was the other 2 that were truly extraordinary. They contained passages from the New Testament, seemingly copied by one of Saunière's predecessors in the 18th century. But they were not straightforward copies. They were filled with strange anomalies. The words were run together with no spacing, and dotted with cryptic, seemingly random extra letters. Some letters were deliberately raised above the others. It was a complex cipher. According to the legend that would later be meticulously constructed around these events, Saunière recognized that he had stumbled upon something of great importance. He took the parchments to his superior, the Bishop of Carcassonne, who, intrigued, gave Saunière a small sum of money and his blessing to travel to Paris to have the documents examined by experts. In Paris, Saunière supposedly consulted with specialists at the Church of Saint Sulpice, a place long associated with esoteric societies and mystical history. It was here, the story goes, that the codes were broken. The deciphered messages were cryptic and tantalizing. One of the hidden texts, pieced together from the raised letters, was said to read, "A Dagobert II roi et a Chaun si trésor la mort." To Dagobert II, king, and to Chaun belongs this treasure, and he is their dead. This message was explosive. It seemed to link a lost treasure to the Merovingian king Dagobert II, who had been assassinated in the 7th century, and to a mysterious entity called Chaun. When Saunière returned from Paris to Rennes-le-Château, he was a changed man. And, inexplicably, he was a very wealthy one. This poor country priest, who had struggled to afford basic repairs, suddenly began spending vast, almost astronomical sums of money. The source of this sudden fortune remains the central, unanswered question of the entire mystery. He immediately began a lavish and highly eccentric renovation of his small church. The new decor was bizarre, filled with strange, unsettling symbolism that seemed to defy orthodox Catholic iconography. Just inside the main entrance, he placed a statue of the demon Asmodeus, a figure from the Book of Tobit and a prominent demon in esoteric lore, known as a guardian of secrets and a builder of temples, including, according to some legends, the Temple of Solomon. The demon was depicted holding up the holy water stoup, and above him, Saunière inscribed the words, Par si signa tu lu vaincras. By this sign you will conquer him. The Stations of the Cross, which depict Christ's journey to the crucifixion, were filled with odd and unsettling details. In one station, a child is wrapped in a Scottish tartan plaid. In another, Simon of Cyrene, who helps Jesus carry the cross, is depicted wearing a crown. At the 14th station, which shows Jesus' body being carried into the tomb, the scene takes place at night, under a full moon, an image rich with symbolic meaning. Above the main entrance to the church, Saunière inscribed a terrifying and paradoxical phrase for a house of God, Terribilis est locus est. This is a terrible place. While the phrase is from the Old Testament, its placement at the entrance of a church was, at the very least, highly unconventional. But his spending did not stop at the church. He built himself a magnificent new residence, the Villa Bethania, which he never lived in, supposedly intending it as a home for retired priests. He constructed a grand, neo-Gothic library tower on the edge of the hill, which he named the Tour Magdala, the Magdalene Tower, in honor of his church's patron saint. He connected the two with a beautiful walkway and gardens. He hosted lavish dinner parties, collected fine wines, rare books, and precious artifacts. He lived a life of extraordinary luxury, far beyond the means of any rural priest. The villagers, and later, the world, were left to wonder. Where did the money come from? The whispers in the village turned to legends of treasure. Had Saunière, in his renovations, found the lost treasure of the Cathars, who were known to have hidden their wealth in the region before their final defeat at Montségur? Or perhaps it was the fabled war chest of the Knights Templar, who had numerous commanderies in the Languedoc. Or maybe even the lost treasure of the Visigoths, who had sacked Rome in 410 AD and were said to have carried off the incredible treasure of the Temple of Solomon. Saunière never revealed the source of his wealth, which only deepened the mystery. His lavish spending and unorthodox behavior eventually drew the attention of the church authorities. He was accused of simony, specifically of trafficking in masses, accepting money from across Europe for prayers that he never intended to say. He was summoned by the bishop to account for his finances, but he defied the orders. He was eventually suspended from his priestly duties, but he refused to leave his parish, and he continued to live in his grand estate, supported by his devoted housekeeper, Marie de Narnaud, who was rumored to be his confidant and the only one who knew his secret. Saunière died in 1917, taking that secret to his grave. The circumstances of his death are also part of the legend. He is said to have suffered a sudden stroke on January 17th, a date that esoteric researchers would later note for its significance in certain mystical traditions. As he lay dying, he is said to have made a final, deathbed confession to a fellow priest who was brought to hear it. The priest, it is claimed, was so horrified by what Saunière revealed that he fled the room, pale and shaken, and denied the dying Saunière his final rites of absolution. He never spoke of what he heard. Marie de Narnaud, his loyal housekeeper, inherited his estate and his debts. She promised to reveal the great secret before she died, but she too suffered a stroke that left her paralyzed and unable to speak. She passed away in 1953, and the secret, it seemed, was lost forever. For decades, the story of Bérenger Saunière and his mysterious wealth was little more than a local legend, a piece of rich French folklore that attracted treasure hunters and curiosity seekers to the small, sleepy village. They came with shovels and metal detectors, digging up the church grounds, convinced that the priest had found and then re-hidden a great physical treasure. But in the 1950s and 60s, the story was picked up and dramatically amplified by a man named Noël Corbu. Corbu had bought Saunière's estate from Marie de Narnaud and turned it into a hotel and restaurant. To attract tourists, he began to spin a grand and romantic tale of lost treasure and royal secrets, based on local rumors and his own embellishments. He recounted this story to his guests, and, most importantly, to local newspapers. The legend began to spread. And then, in the 1960s, the story fell into the hands of a man who would transform it from a local curiosity into a global phenomenon. A man who saw in the riddle of Rennes-le-Château the perfect raw material for a grand, modern myth. A man who may have been the greatest historical hoaxer of the 20th century. His name was Pierre Plantard, and he would invent an ancient secret society to explain it all. The story of the priest Bérenger Saunière and his unexplained wealth was a fascinating local legend, a perfect mystery simmering in the French Pyrenees. But it was just theta local story. It required a new element, a grander narrative, to elevate it from a treasure hunt into a world-altering conspiracy. And that element would be provided by a man named Pierre Plantard. Plantard was a fascinating, and as we shall see, a deeply unreliable figure. Born in 1920, he was a French draftsman with a penchant for esoteric history, a deep interest in the Merovingian kings of France, and a lifelong ambition for influence and recognition. He also claimed, without any credible evidence, to be a direct descendant of the Merovingian king Dagobert II, the very king mentioned in the coded parchments that Saunière had supposedly found. In the post-war years of the 1950s, Plantard saw in the burgeoning legend of Rennes-le-Château the perfect raw material for a grand, modern myth. He didn't just want to solve the riddle of Saunière's wealth. He wanted to invent the secret that the priest had discovered. And to do that, he needed to invent an ancient secret society responsible for guarding it. On May 7, 1956, in the French town of Annemasse, near the Swiss border, Pierre Plantard and 3 associates legally registered a new association. They called it the Priory of Sion. According to its official statutes, it was a modest social and charitable club dedicated to providing affordable housing and supporting the local community. It published a small journal called Circuit, which dealt with local issues and esoteric ramblings. At the time, it was little more than a local fraternity. But this legally registered name, the Priory of Sion, would become the anchor for a much grander and entirely fabricated history. Beginning in the early 1960s, Plantard, with a small circle of confederates including the author Gérard Dacide and a surrealist artist and actor named Philippe de Chérizy, began to construct one of the most elaborate and successful historical hoaxes of the 20th century. Their method was brilliant in its simplicity and audacity. They began to create a series of ancient documents and secretly plant them in the Bibliothèque Nationale, the National Library of France, in Paris, where they knew future researchers would eventually discover them. These documents, which came to be known as the Dossiers Secrets d'Henri Lobineau, the secret dossiers of Henri Lobineau, were a masterwork of pseudo-historical forgery. They were filled with complex and entirely fictitious genealogies, cryptic poems, falsified historical records, and coded messages, all designed to prove the existence of a secret society that had endured in the shadows for nearly 1,000 years. According to these secret dossiers, the Priory of Sion was not a small club founded in 1956. It was a powerful and ancient order, founded in Jerusalem in the year 1099, during the First Crusade, by the great Crusader King Godfrey of Bouillon. Its purpose, the dossiers claimed, was to protect the secrets and the bloodline of the Merovingian dynasty, the ancient long-haired Frankish kings who had ruled France centuries earlier. And why were the Merovingians so important? Because, the documents hinted, they were the direct descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. This was the heart of the great secret. The Holy Grail, the Sang Graal, was not a cup. The name, they claimed, was a corruption of the old French sang real, meaning royal blood. The treasure that Berenger Saunière had discovered in his church was not gold or jewels, but parchments that contained proof of this sacred bloodline, a truth so explosive it could shatter the very foundations of the Catholic Church. To give their fabricated society an unimpeachable air of authority, the dossiers provided a stunning list of the Priory's past Grand Masters, or Nautineers. It was a roll call of the greatest and most influential minds in Western history: Leonardo da Vinci, Sandro Botticelli, Isaac Newton, Victor Hugo, Claude Debussy, and, in the 20th century, the avant-garde artist and filmmaker Jean Cocteau. The suggestion was breathtaking: that the great geniuses of art, science, and literature had all been secret guardians of the truth about Christ's bloodline. The story was then carefully packaged and brought to a mass audience. In 1967, Gérard Dacide published the book L'Or de Rennes, The Gold of Rennes, which was an instant bestseller in France. While Dacide was the credited author, the book was based almost entirely on the narrative and the forged documents that had been supplied to him by Pierre Plantard. It told the story of Saunière's discovery and explicitly linked it to the lost treasure of the Merovingians and the shadowy Priory of Sion. The myth had now entered the public consciousness. But the story went global in 1982, with the publication of the international mega-bestseller, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, by 3 British authors: Michael Bygent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. Lincoln, a writer and BBC documentary filmmaker, had become obsessed with the Rennes-le-Château mystery after reading L'Or de Rennes. He teamed up with Bygent and Lee, and together they conducted a years-long investigation into the affair. Crucially, they took the secret dossiers they found in the Bibliothèque Nationale at face value. They treated Plantard as a genuine, if cryptic, source. They even interviewed him. They then expanded upon the claims in the dossiers, weaving them into a grand, unified conspiracy theory that connected Rennes-le-Château, the Priory of Sion, the Knights Templar, and the Cathars into a single, cohesive narrative. Their central thesis, which would later be adopted wholesale by Dan Brown, was this: 1. Jesus Christ married Mary Magdalene and they had at least one child. 2. After the crucifixion, a pregnant Mary Magdalene fled to the south of France, where their sacred bloodline was protected and eventually merged with the Frankish royal families, creating the Merovingian dynasty. 3. The Catholic Church, whose power was based on the doctrine of the divinity of a celibate Christ, had spent centuries brutally suppressing this truth, viewing it as the ultimate heresy. 4. The Priory of Sion was the secret society founded in 1099 to protect the descendants of this sacred bloodline, who were, in their view, the rightful kings of Europe. 5. And the Knights Templar, they argued, were created to be the military and financial arm of the Priory of Sion, their public face. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail was a cultural phenomenon. It presented its explosive claims not as fiction, but as serious, albeit speculative, historical research. It blurred the lines between academic inquiry and conspiracy so effectively that millions of readers around the world were left wondering, what if this is true? The book laid the entire groundwork for Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Brown took the central premise of Bygent, Lee, and Lincoln's work, The Sacred Bloodline of Christ and Mary Magdalene, the central role of the Priory of Sion, and the involvement of its supposed Grand Master, Leonardo da Vinci, and wrapped it in the thrilling, page-turning package of a modern-day treasure hunt. His novel, published in 2003, became one of the best-selling books of all time, selling over 80 million copies worldwide. And the Priory of Sion was transformed from a niche conspiracy theory into a global household name. But what about the truth? What about the man who started it all? The Grand Conspiracy, the Ancient Brotherhood, the illustrious list of Grand Master Sit was all a hoax. A brilliant, intricate, and astonishingly successful hoax, conceived and executed by Pierre Plantard and his small circle of collaborators. In the 1980s and 90s, French researchers, journalists, and even court systems began to dismantle Plantard's carefully constructed story, piece by piece. They found irrefutable evidence that he and his associate, Philippe de Chérizy, had personally forged the secret dossiers and planted them in the National Library in the 1960s. De Chérizy, a surrealist with a love for pranks, even confessed on a French radio program that he had fabricated the parchments that Bérenger Saunière had supposedly found, admitting that he had copied the biblical texts and created the ciphers himself. The final, definitive nail in the coffin came in 1993. Plantard, in his later years, had become involved in a political scandal involving a man named Roger Patrice Pellet. During the legal investigation, the judge ordered a search of Plantard's home. They found a cache of documents, some of which declared that Plantard was the true king of France. When questioned under oath by the judge, Plantard's grand narrative completely fell apart. He admitted, finally, that he had invented the entire story. The Priory of Sion was not an ancient order founded in 1099. It was a small social club he had created in 1956. The impressive list of Grand Masters, from Leonardo da Vinci to Isaac Newton, was a complete fabrication, chosen to lend credibility and historical glamour to his tale. Pierre Plantard was not the descendant of ancient kings. He was a gifted, obsessive, and ultimately fraudulent mythmaker, a man who had successfully planted a story so compelling, so romantic, and so perfectly tailored to the modern appetite for conspiracy, that he had managed to fool a generation of readers, authors, and researchers. And so, the Priory of Sion, the secret society sworn to protect the sacred bloodline of Christ, was revealed to be a phantom, a ghost created in the mid-20th century, a work of fiction that had masqueraded as history. But what of the other elements of the story? The ones that existed long before Plantard began his great hoax? What about the Knights Templar and their fabled connection to the Holy Grail? Here, we leave the world of modern fabrications and drift back into the realm of genuine medieval mystery, to explore a symbol that has haunted the Western imagination for 1,000 years. We have unmasked the Priory of Sion as a brilliant and elaborate 20th century hoax, a fiction that masqueraded as history. But as we strip away the modern layers of conspiracy, we are left with an older, more genuine, and far more profound mystery: the Holy Grail. Few symbols in Western culture are as powerful, as resonant, and as enigmatic as this one. For centuries, it has been the ultimate object of the quest, a symbol of divine grace, lost wisdom, and the highest spiritual attainment. But what is it? And where did its story truly begin? The popular image of the Grail, the one cemented in our collective imagination, is that of the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, and later used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch Christ's blood at the crucifixion. This is the version that has been immortalized in art, literature, and film, from the tapestries of medieval castles to the adventures of Indiana Jones. But the story of the Grail is far more complex and fluid than that. It did not begin as a fully formed Christian relic. Its origins are much murkier, rooted in the rich soil of pre-Christian Celtic mythology, which was then grafted onto the new Christian faith. The earliest Grail stories emerged in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, as part of the great cycle of Arthurian romances, a body of literature that blended the old pagan myths of Britain and France with the new ideals of Christian chivalry. In these early tales, the Grail was often depicted not as a cup, but as a magical cauldron or a platter of plenty, an object that could provide endless sustenance and heal the land, presided over by a wounded king whose ailment was mirrored in the barrenness of his kingdom. The first writer to bring the Grail into the world of literature was the French poet Crétin de Troyes. In his unfinished romance, Perceval, the story of the Grail, written around the year 1190. In his story, the young, naive knight Perceval visits the castle of the wounded Fisher King. There, he witnesses a strange and silent procession. A young man carries a bleeding lance, two others carry golden candelabras, and a beautiful maiden carries a shining, golden dish, a Grail. This dish is so brilliant it outshines the candles. It is a sacred and enigmatic object, but Crétin never explains what it is or why it is so important. He died before he could finish the tale, leaving the mystery of the Grail tantalizingly unsolved. It was the writers who followed Crétin who took his mysterious object and transformed it into the definitive Christian relic. The German poet Wolfram von Eschenbach, in his epic poem Perceval, completed in the early 13th century, offered a different vision. He described the Grail not as a cup, but as a magical stone that had fallen from heaven, the lapsit exilis. This stone had the power to provide eternal youth and sustenance, and it was guarded in a magnificent castle called Montsalvech by a lineage of Grail kings. But it was another French poet, Robert de Boron, who, in his work Joseph de Arimathie, written around the year 1200, explicitly identified the Grail as the cup of the Last Supper. It was de Boron who created the now famous narrative of Joseph of Arimathea catching Christ's blood in the cup and later bringing the sacred vessel to the west, specifically to Glastonbury in Britain, a place already steeped in Arthurian and Celtic myth. De Boron also created the idea of a secret lineage of Grail keepers, a brotherhood sworn to protect the sacred vessel through the generations. These stories created a powerful cultural phenomenon. The quest for the Holy Grail became the central, spiritual adventure of the Arthurian legends. The Knights of the Round Table, the flawed but great Lancelot, the pure and ascetic Galahad, the steadfast Bors, the innocent Perceval embarked on this perilous quest. It was a journey that was as much an inner, spiritual trial as it was a physical one. It tested their virtue, their faith, and their courage. And in the most famous versions of the tale, like the Great Quest del Saint Graal, only the most spiritually pure of heart, Sir Galahad, could successfully achieve the Grail vision and heal the wounded Fisher King. So where do the Knights Templar fit into this rich and evolving legend? Historically, there is no direct, verifiable evidence linking the real, historical Knights Templar of the 12th and 13th centuries to the Holy Grail. The Templars are never mentioned as the guardians of the Grail in any of the original medieval Arthurian romances. This now famous connection is a much more modern one, a powerful theory that gained immense popularity in the 20th century, particularly through the works of esoteric authors and, most famously, in The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail. The theory, however, is deeply seductive and, on the surface, seems to make perfect sense. The Knights Templar were the most powerful, most secretive, and most respected military monastic order of the Crusades. They were headquartered for over a century on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the holiest and most archaeologically sensitive site in all of Christendom. They were known to have conducted extensive excavations beneath the Temple Mount. Who better, then, to have discovered and become the secret guardians of Christianity's most sacred and powerful relic? Proponents of this theory point to several intriguing, if circumstantial, pieces of evidence. They note the Templars' sudden and spectacular rise to wealth and power, suggesting it could have come from more than just donations. They point to the accusations of heresy that were leveled against them during their trial, particularly the charge of worshipping a mysterious bearded head, Baphomet. Could this head, they ask, have been a coded reference to a different secret, perhaps even the Shroud of Turin, or the head of a secret knowledge tradition? They also point to the symbolism. The Templars, like the St. John's ambulance brigade that would follow in their footsteps, revered John the Baptist. Some of the Grail legends, particularly Wolfram von Eschenbach's, have esoteric and non-canonical themes that would have been considered heretical by the Orthodox Church. Could the Templars have been guarding a more Gnostic or Johannite version of Christianity, one that the Grail symbolized? The theory also offers a neat and romantic explanation for the enduring mystery of the lost Templar treasure. If the Grail was their greatest secret, they would have done anything to protect it when King Philip's crackdown began in 1307. Did their fleet of ships, which famously vanished from the port of La Rochelle on the eve of the arrests, carry the Grail to a safe haven? Perhaps to Scotland, where they are said to have aided Robert the Bruce. Or to Portugal, where the order was simply rebranded. Or even, as some more adventurous theories suggest, to the New World long before Columbus? This is where the story connects back, in the world of modern myth, to the fabricated Priory of Sion. The theory, as laid out in The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail, posits that the Priory was the head, the secret steering committee, and the Knights Templar were the hands, the public military arm. When the Templars were destroyed, the Priory simply went underground, continuing its sacred mission to protect the Bloodleneath Sang Raylin secret. It is a magnificent, intricate, and deeply compelling story. It ties together all the great mysteries of the medieval world, the Cathars, the Templars, the Grail, the Merovingian kings into a single, unified, and explosive narrative. But it is, for the most part, a modern invention, a house of cards built upon the forged foundations of the Priory of Sion hoax. The historical evidence for a link between the Templars and the Grail is speculative at best. But the power of the myth is undeniable. It has so thoroughly captured the popular imagination that for many, the two are now inseparable. The true secret of the Holy Grail, then, may not be a physical object hidden in a vault, or a secret bloodline waiting to be discovered. The true secret may be the remarkable power of the symbol itself. The Grail is a mirror. Over the centuries, it has reflected our deepest spiritual longings and our changing cultural anxieties. For the medieval world, it was a symbol of Christian faith, of chivalric virtue, and of the mystical presence of God on earth. For the authors of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and the Da Vinci Code, in a modern world wrestling with questions of gender and institutional power, it became a symbol of the sacred feminine, of a suppressed history of women and sexuality within Christianity, personified by Mary Magdalene. And for others still, particularly those influenced by Jungian psychology, the Grail is a purely internal psychological symbol. It represents the quest for wholeness, for the integration of the conscious and unconscious parts of the self, for the healing of the inner wounded king. The Holy Grail endures and remains so powerful precisely because it is not one thing. It is a question, not an answer. It is a quest, not a destination. It is a symbol that can hold whatever meaning we need it to hold. And so, we are left with a story that is a palimpsest, layer upon layer of history, myth, and modern fabrication. We have the strange and very true story of a French priest's sudden and unexplained wealth. We have the brilliant, audacious, and now debunked hoax of Pierre Plantard and his Priory of Sion. And we have the ancient, enduring, and deeply poetic legend of the Holy Grail, now forever intertwined with the romantic, but historically unproven, myth of its Templar guardians. It is a story that shows us, with beautiful clarity, how powerfully a secret, whether real or imagined, can capture the human imagination and shape our understanding of the past. Of course, here is the highly detailed and event-rich script for the conclusion, the power of a story, which serves as the final, reflective part of the episode. This script is designed to tie together all the threads of the narrative, leaving the listener with a lasting impression in the signature calm and contemplative style of Driftwood Histories. And so our journey into the heart of this great and enduring mystery comes to its conclusion. We have followed a trail of whispers that began in a small, dilapidated church in the French Pyrenees and spiraled outwards, through the grand libraries of Paris, into the battle-scarred history of the Crusades, and onto the pages of a modern-day thriller that captivated the world. We began with the riddle of Rennes-le-Château, with the story of the impoverished priest, Berenger Saunière, and his sudden, inexplicable wealth. We saw how his lavish, and deeply strange, renovations to his church and home, the statue of the demon Asmodeus, the cryptic inscriptions, the Magdalene Tower, created a local legend of lost treasure that simmered for decades. A perfect, unsolved mystery, waiting for a storyteller. Then we met that storyteller, Pierre Plantard. We saw how this ambitious and obsessive mythmaker, with his circle of collaborators, took the raw material of Saunière's legend and constructed one of the most successful historical hoaxes of the 20th century. We saw how they forged the dossier's secrets, planting these falsified documents in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and how they invented a secret society of breathtaking scope, the Priory of Sion. We learned of the Priory's fabricated 900-year history, its supposed founding by Godfrey of Bouillon in 1099, and its astonishing and entirely fictitious list of Grand Masters, including Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo. We saw how this meticulously crafted hoax was brought to the public first through the French bestseller Lord de Rennes, and then went global with the sensational 1982 book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. And it was in this book that the central, explosive secret was laid bare. The idea that the Holy Grail was not a cup, but a Bloodleneath Sang real descending from the union of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and that the Priory of Sion, with the Knights Templar as its military arm, was the ancient guardian of this world-shattering truth. A truth so powerful it was finally unveiled to millions more through Dan Brown's record-shattering novel, The Da Vinci Code. But then, we watched as the entire, magnificent edifice crumbled under the weight of historical scrutiny. We learned how French investigators and journalists, and eventually Plantard himself under oath, revealed the truth. The Priory of Sion was a 20th century invention. The ancient genealogies were forgeries. The secret was a lie. And yet, even with the hoax revealed, a deeper mystery remained. We turned our gaze to the Holy Grail itself. We discovered that its origins were not in the New Testament, but in the Celtic myths and medieval romances of the 12th and 13th centuries. We saw how it began as a mysterious, shining platter in the work of Chrétien de Troyes, before being transformed by poets like Robert de Boron into the sacred cup of the Last Supper. We explored the modern, romantic theory that links the Grail to the Knights Templar, an idea that, while lacking direct historical evidence, is so compelling it has become inseparable from the legend. The idea of the warrior monks, headquartered on the Temple Mount, as the secret guardians of Christendom's greatest relic, is a story that simply feels true, even if it isn't. So, what are we left with at the end of this tangled journey? We are left with a story that is a palimpsest, layer upon layer of history, myth, and modern fabrication. A truth wrapped in a legend, which is itself wrapped in an elaborate hoax. The story of the Priory of Sion and the Holy Grail is a powerful testament to the human need for myth. It reminds us that we are all, in our own way, seekers on a quest. We search for hidden truths, for lost connections, for a grand, unifying narrative that makes sense of the beautiful and often confusing world we live in. We are drawn to the idea that beneath the surface of official history, there lies a deeper, more profound story waiting to be discovered. Pierre Plantard understood this desire perfectly. He did not succeed because his forgeries were flawless. He succeeded because he gave people a story they desperately wanted to believe. A story that connected the dots between art, science, and religion. A story that elevated the silenced feminine principle. A story that hinted at a hidden truth that could overturn the established order. And perhaps that is the ultimate secret that this tale reveals. Not a secret about a bloodline or a hidden treasure, but a secret about ourselves. The most powerful force in human history is not an army, not an empire, and not a secret society. It is the power of a good story. A story, once told, can take on a life of its own, can outlive its creator, it can transcend the truth, and it can change the way millions of people see the world. The Priory of Sion may have been a fiction, but the quest it represents is very real. It is the quest for meaning, the search for our own hidden history, the desire to believe that there is more to this life than meets the eye. Thank you for joining me on this voyage with Driftwood Histories. If these stories have stirred your curiosity and soothed your mind, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of fellow travelers. There are many more hidden currents of time, many more secret histories, for us to explore together. Until then, sleep well. May your own quest, whatever it may be a fruitful one. And may your dreams be filled with a little bit of wonder, a little bit of mystery, and the magic of a story well told. Good night.